The number one, I would say, speak with your customers. Like no matter what your current, org setup is or what your responsibilities are, like figure out a way how you can speak with customers. Don't get blocked by, your account management team or someone who's going to be guarding your customers. Like if you're in partnership, you should be talking to customers. That's my opinion. Second, I would say if you don't have this product sense, try and figure out ways how you can develop that, especially if you're in a role where you're doing product partnerships and integrations. Perhaps you don't have to be a great PM, you don't have to know how to write a great spec, but like having a product sense, it goes very well hand in hand with talking to customers. Like those two things will enable you to know which flow or integration is just bullshit and we're doing because of logos, or which ones actually will add value to customers.
What you mentioned about like 3 key points that your partner is working right now is like super important, and it's not a really small thing because it changes your focus like completely, right? So I think it's a really great point. Second, you mentioned finding internal advocates and figuring out all these complexities of these big companies. How did you do that? Like, how did you find people who would vouch for you and push your case forward?
I think one part of that was just like being honest with the partners and, not really just chasing partnerships that would really not make sense for the partner or for us. And it would just be for a fancy logo or something. And it's tempting because you want to work with all the cool companies, especially in B2B SaaS. But it was just like understanding that, we have to first understand what our users want. Like, does anyone even want this integration if we're talking about a product partnership? And I think that sort of having that user understanding, like deep user understanding, also gives you the confidence in those partnerships conversations. So suddenly it's not just you have to convince someone like a big company that it's just going to be so beneficial for both of us if we do something together. It's more like we have these customers, say these 10 big customers that really want this and that to do with 2 of our products. Now, can we make it work? So again, like that changes the narrative a lot. And that was a big part of what the team did. We would sort of, again, maybe this is unique to Slido and the size that we were at, but just like this understanding and listening to customers became a huge thing for the whole company. And we pushed everyone to talk to customers. We didn't want to create a culture where we have just salespeople or a team that will be talking to customers and I have to go through them. It will be just like anyone. So the PMs, of course, talk to customers regularly. We then created a user research team. So embedded this sort of thinking to everyone, and partnerships and BD was a huge part of that. So, the team and I will be talking to customers, meeting customers almost every day, which now I'm sort of hearing from other companies that it's not always the case. And it makes me wonder, makes me realize how important that was for us at that stage.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And it is like rather unusual what you're doing in terms of talking to customers. But what is also interesting is what you mentioned is that, like, in the end of the day, partnership revolve around customers, right? They don't revolve around strategies of different companies. They revolve around, do customers want this like together, or do they want this product delivered through this channel together with other products? And this is why partnerships are quite strategically important. Big question regarding integrations and kind of big partners. So you chose to have a handful of integrations rather than have hundreds of them. It might show strategic thinking. Like, how do you think about it?
Honestly, like a huge part of that is limited developer resources that we just couldn't go and dedicate people to build a ton of integration. So we really had to choose. That kind of helped, but it was also frustrating. The second part, again, I mentioned this just now, but talking to customers was key because that gave us the understanding, like which integration is important, which one maybe isn't, but sounds cool and fancy. And don't get me wrong, like we made this mistake many times. Like we built an integration, even the one with Slack that we built, and we later on did have to sunset because we realized that the way we build it isn't really solving the job to be done for a customer, or isn't really solving the use case that people care about. although some customers ask for it. So we made mistakes and then we pivoted or changed or even like let that feature or integration go. So those two things are important. And then there was a lot of, especially in the sort of later years, there's a lot of thinking and strategy going into partnerships and integrations, especially on the product side. Once we realized that this is going to be core to our growth, it was also weirdly unique, but I was reporting straight to the CEO, so the partnership function was kind of had this like lucky seat, I guess, in the company, and I was part of the executive team. So it was always embedded into like just like the highest level of any strategy and any talk. And even when I would be like hearing something about a product strategy from a product leader or customer success, I would be like raising my hand and screaming, well, we haven't talked about partnerships, and like, where does biz dev come into this? And we can do more with this and that partner. So I was very lucky that we got to have this like almost like seed together with the team that we're working on this on. We didn't have to like convince anyone or convince the founder that partnerships are important. And thanks to that, there was a lot of thinking going into what kind of partners do we need for this sort of next level of growth. And it's pretty obvious, but one big area was really just presentation software. So, you think about Slido and you think about Slido entering the internal meetings world. It also meant that we're entering a smaller size of meetings. So even like team meetings of 5 people are going to be using Slido now. Now, those people don't have a technical setup that WebSummit did. So how the hell are they going to use Slido? I'm not going to be able to sit there next to them and click on their Slido device and click their slides. So that got us really and pushed us into, figuring out how are we going to integrate with PowerPoint, Google Slides, and all these products. And we started with Google Slides because we use Google internally. And I think that partnership with Google and building this integration with Slides was kind of this biggest point in terms of really showing us what does this next chapter of growth for Slido look like, because it opened the opportunity and opened almost like this market of smaller meetings, new use cases. And it was always part of this strategy when we talked about Slido from like early years as well. Like, yeah, we're starting with conferences, but then we want to grow eventually into smaller meetings so that everyone can use Slido for the presentation. But this was like a huge blocker that we couldn't move on that strategy before Slido was seamlessly integrated with all these tools. So that was a huge that's an example of kind of how we stayed focused. There was a lot of strategy and thinking and planning into like this and there that we want to say yes to, but also here's 20 others that we want to say no to. And then I think as a team, we were confident to say those no's to people and to partners.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually teasing you. Essentially, like building a gazillion of integrations is pretty easy, but figuring out what is a handful of what's the most important is like pretty difficult actually. So just before we jump into like your next stage of growth, and two questions regarding your team. How did your team evolve over this journey that you just mentioned until COVID acceleration, let's say? And so you was reporting directly to CEO, which is amazing. I think why is this was the case?
Why? I don't know. I wish I had the answer. I think maybe it's the nature of the product and us realizing pretty early on that we're just not going to be able to make it unless partnerships and integrations are core to our growth strategy and go to market. It was just like, as I said, like with these examples with the presentation software, like there's just no way that maybe we could have built our own presentation software, but like that would be probably quite difficult. So I think that's why. And this is more of a like kind of general Slido culture, but especially in the partnerships team, there was loads of flexibility and ownership to everyone on the team. Like these are, and you said this before, it's almost like this like extended founder or CEO. Like people on that team would be meeting all those like most important customers, executives at other companies in terms of like partnering up. So our founder and CEO, he wasn't sort of blocking any of that, which was great. So the team got a lot of ownership. And as I said, like it was a lucky, for sure, sort of coincidence or setup that the team and I had this opportunity to like work closely with the CEO and the founder, be part of the exec team discussions, and just be close to like every major decision that was going on. And then of course, like it changed over time. Like we started with marketing, then it was kind of splitting marketing and product. Then it became very heavy on the product side, and we actually took out that marketing portion and actually put it into a different team, under a different team. So as things do as you're scaling your company, like this evolved as well, and the structure of the team as well. But it was never a huge team. As I said at the very beginning, I didn't even know that like these things as titles or roles exist in tech, but here we are, I guess.
Amazing. So, and then you essentially yourself, you eventually became VP of product, right?
Yeah. So this was a very different role. So our CEO was actually, it was very multiple hats at that point, and one was head of product. But I think as COVID came and a lot of things happened with like us transitioning from events as they were before to like no events and then hybrid events. He asked me if I could step in and help with the product management side org, especially because we wanted to also hire more PMs and scale the organization. And it was a very, very different role to like the partnerships role that I was in before. I think a lot more imposter syndrome because I was never product leader or that person before. There was a great opportunity to learn something new and even like bring in more of that partnerships or business thinking into other product teams, because by that time we were already working closely with product. But you could see kind of that, not every PM would think about product integrations and partnerships as like this channel that needs to be also thought about. So bringing the thinking was quite a fun challenge, but I also just focused a lot on like operations at that point, like just setting up the PM function so that we could double it essentially now.
I've seen like an interesting tweet recently about that PMs sometimes have tension with partnership folks, like in terms of, do we want to integrate? Like it's not our priority right now, so let's do it later and all stuff. Was it transferable? Your skill set that you built in partnerships and kind of working together with multiple companies, figuring out and talking with customers, was it like really helpful? Because I see right now that more and more partnership managers or people from partnership background actually move closer toward products. Maybe not leading products, but actually moving like closer and closer towards products. So.
I think it depends on your organization. Like one thing that I definitely felt that I don't have a lot of confidence in is just like kind of the general like PM skills, because I was never a formal PM and especially not a technical PM. Although I would do a lot of PM work as even part of my partnerships role, like, when we're thinking through and some of the integrations early on, like we didn't have dedicated PMs for those partnerships and those integrations. So it will be on me and our team to kind of figure out, what does this specification look like? What is user flow? Like we would kind of own it all, almost up to an extent where the product would get mad at us that we were just doing our own stuff. But it was a different sort of product lens that I came into the product role. So, it probably would have looked differently if someone who scaled through a different company as a PM and then led the PM organization came and led product at Slido. And I said that from the beginning, like, I don't think I'm the best head of product for this company. Maybe for this stage, yes, I'm happy to take the challenge, but I think for the next sort of chapter and to help the PMs really grow, we should get someone who's done this before, not me.
I'm sure that you will do a great job. You mentioned before that you was growing with integrations, and I saw your graph with integration with Google before even COVID came, like everything was like going up to the right. And then how these events over the last year and a half, influence your trajectory and your partnerships and everything else?
I mean, we're definitely very privileged with Slido that we sort of got to ride this COVID wave on the positive side of things. There's just so many companies that struggled, and other businesses, not even talking about other industries. but it did actually help us in many ways, I think. I mean, thinking back to March 2020, I think it was 2020, feels ages ago, but I remember those months where we weren't sure like what's happening with COVID, what's happening with the industry. It was the week where I had a bunch of flights planned to South by Southwest, to other conferences. And from one day to another, I remember just like getting the emails that everything's canceled, like just everything died in March in terms of events industry. And we didn't really know what to do. And it didn't take too long until customers started reaching out, and especially enterprise customers as well, who were trying to really quickly navigate this shift from, okay, all these meetings are now being virtual and all these like company events are now non-existent or virtual or hybrid, maybe in some cases. And they came to us for advice. Like I remember our sales team sharing that customers even come to us and ask, well, how do I set up Zoom? And our sales team had to explain, like, we have nothing to do with Zoom. We'd love to help you, but it's not really our competency. So it was definitely a unique time. I think everyone was trying to get their shit together and figure out how to make this work.
I'm sure it was like a really, interesting time for you, because essentially you was powering events, and then all of a sudden the entire event industry, collapsed.
Yeah, it just wasn't there. Like none of those happened. But again, like we're lucky that like shortly after we saw our signups rise, and like signups were the highest throughout the whole company's life at that moment. So it was interesting because I think engagement on the broader level and like audience interaction became ever so important now that everyone was stuck behind a camera and behind a Zoom screen. So so that was interesting. It also meant that we had to readjust all that meeting design thought leadership, because we couldn't now sort of advise on like how things work in real world, but we would learn a lot of tips and tricks on how to make a virtual webinar, virtual event more engaging with Slido. So that was a big part, and it also pushed us and also gave us a lot of focus again to a new area in terms of partnerships. And that was, again, not a surprise, but that was all the video conferencing tools. So as we before kind of had this chapter of presentation software, PowerPoints, Google Slides, and that opened this and I'm glad we had that, because now people were able to use Slido with all these tools in the sort of COVID setup. But now it was about how does Slido work with Zoom? How does Slido work with Microsoft Teams? How does Slido work with WebEx? So a lot of that wave that all these video conferencing tools were riding, we heard about the Zoom stories and their growth. Like we got to ride a bit of that wave as well, which was fun. And again, it was like this brutal prioritization, I think, for the team as well. Like we can't do everything now. We have to help our customers navigate this shift. And we have to make sure that Slido will work with all these tools that they're now using and relying on. If video conferencing wasn't there, the life would stop probably in business.
Definitely, that is the case. We are doing this right now. So you learned a lot in partnerships across your journey, which have been fantastic, and you progress into product role. So what is your one or two pieces of advice to partnership folks who are listening to this right now? What is your kind of top of mind thought that you would leave with?
The number one, I would say, speak with your customers. No matter what your current org setup is or what your responsibilities are, figure out a way how you can speak with customers. And don't get blocked by your account management team or someone who's going to be guarding your customers. If you're in partnership, you should be talking to customers. That's my opinion. Second, I would say, if you don't have this product sense, try and figure out ways how you can develop that, especially if you're in a role where you're doing product partnerships and integrations, perhaps. I think having, you don't have to be a great PM, you don't have to know how to write a great spec, but having a product sense of what, it goes very well hand in hand with talking to customers. Those two things will enable you to really kind of know which flow or integration is just bullshit and we're doing because of logos, or which ones actually will add value to customers. And the last little note I would say, just being honest in all those partnerships conversations. As I said, don't be afraid to ask the partner, like, what are their priorities, and see if you align. If you don't, then maybe that's why it's not going anywhere. Just like, yeah, being transparent and open. I think everyone's trying to make something that people like and use, and if there's the way how we can help each other, that's fun.
I think it's like really great advice. And actually, partnership could be and should be strategic, open, and very important function. And you kind of proven that in Slido. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, and it's been like really delight to have you, Juraj.
Yeah, thanks, Roman. Thanks for having me.